Hello everyone, welcome. Now you're all on mute. You're probably meant to stay on mute, so that's right. Hi Tara, that's good that you're here. You're going to ask your question later. Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for joining. Oh, this is so nice. Oh yeah, please say hello in the chat. Hi Leonie. Please say hello in the chat and say where you're joining from, and maybe say how your day is going. Mine's going very nicely so far, and this is such a lovely way to connect. Oh, great, Toowoomba, Flinders Ranges. I love being able to see you all. This is just great. So it doesn't matter whether you're at a piano or not for this one. I'm at a piano just because it's a good place to do it, but you probably won't need your piano because we will be mostly just talking about the ins and outs of dealing with student issues. So we are going to begin, and I thought I would actually start by, first of all, thank you everybody for coming. It is absolutely gorgeous to see all your faces. I thought I should start by introducing myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Samantha Coates, and I'm the author and creator of Blitz Books. And maybe I thought I'd tell you a couple of things that you might not know about me. I have a black Labradoodle named Norbert, who I love to bits. I just love him. I absolutely adore dark chocolate, and I'm a crazy Disney fan. So there you go. There are three things you might not know about me. Okay, now hopefully you're all on mute. Please stay on mute, otherwise the audio gets a little bit funny. Today we are going to talk about the delights and disasters of transfer students, and this is a subject very close to my heart because 100% of my students are transfer students. I actually have found over the years that for some reason, I don't take any beginners. I just get them all as transfers, and I'm completely full up, and I actually prefer it that way. So I've had some wonderful questions emailed in by teachers, and we're going to be talking about those. And I'm also going to be joined by 3 guest speakers via pre-recorded interviews. Benjamin Steinhardt will be discussing technique and posture. Becki Laurent will be discussing dyslexia and other special needs, and then Dr. Deborah Rambo Sinn will be discussing adult piano students. So I'm going to start though with a little story. I thought I would start with a story, and this is a story about my own a transfer student that came to me. This is a teaching moment I'm not exactly proud of. I'm going to share my screen now and show you. This is my student Simone. Now she's all grown up now. She's actually nearly 30 now, but she first came to me when she was 11 years old. So like this is nearly 20 years ago that we're talking about. She was 11 years old and she had been learning piano for 5 years already. And she came to me and we said hello. We did the usual, orientation. And then I said, Simone, will you play something for me? And she played me this piece, which you can probably all recognize, the Bergmuller Progress. Okay, so you all know that piece. Now, Simone played it really quite well. She did not look at the music. She had music in front of her. She did not look at it at all. And that was fine. And then during the process of the lesson, I got her to try and sight read something, and she absolutely could not sight read. And then I got her to try and respond to just a single flashcard. She had no idea what she was looking at. She clearly could not respond to written music at all. Now, this was a long time ago, and I didn't really know about rote teaching, and I didn't know the benefits of rote teaching. And so I was mortified that she was playing this piece. I didn't understand how she had come to learn it. And then I said to Simone's mother, oh, well, look, the last 5 years of piano lessons have been a complete waste of time, and we're going to have to go back and start Simone on pieces that she can actually read, because it's very important that she doesn't play anything that she can't read, because that's how I was taught, right? So poor old Simone, the next piece that she had was this one, because that was her reading standard. Now, I hope you're all cringing right now at the thought that I did this, because I am cringing at the thought that I did this. I would not handle this way now. But this is a classic example of gaps that we find with transfer students, and trying to manage the gaps and jump in at where they are and try not to go backwards. And I've probably received the most questions about this. You know, how do we handle gaps in learning? Now, I'm going to, I would not do that now with Simone. I would keep her playing roughly at the level that it already was, and I'd use rote teaching to do that, and then I would improve her sight reading using other resources. And I'm going to come back and finish that story later on and tell you about Simone later on. Okay. So for now, though, I would like to take a quick poll. Now, Beth and I have a poll. Oh, can I just say in advance, thank you to Beth, who is my wonderful virtual assistant for today. Beth's going to be helping out by reading out any burning questions from the chat when it's question time. And she's about to put the poll up on the screen. So if you could fill your waiting list entirely with either transfer students or beginners, which would you choose? And I'd love you to pick just one of these. So either I prefer taking beginners, or I prefer taking transfer students, or I have no preference, I like both equally. Okay, so could you just choose one of those right now? And then I'm going to show you the poll that I ran in Australasian Piano Pedagogy Group. The Art of Piano Pedagogy Group. What am I saying? I'm going to show you that poll. So we have got, this was the poll that I took, this was the poll that I took in the Art of Piano Pedagogy Group. Got 500 votes overall. Mine was actually the 500th vote when I realized I hadn't voted. And I prefer taking transfer students, and I'm way in the minority, Only 1 in 7 teachers prefer transfer students, and the rest was absolutely equal between taking beginners and having no preference. So probably the majority preferred taking beginners. And it's pretty obvious why, because then you get to mold them from the beginning and they have no bad habits. Now, what about today's numbers? So Beth, can you tell us what today's numbers were of the people who voted?
Sometimes that mute button is so hard to find. So our poll numbers, we've got 36% saying they prefer to take beginners, 58% saying they're equal opportunity and they like both, and then a whopping 5% only prefer to take transfer students.
Okay, so it's roughly the same. It's even more or less skewed towards taking transfer students. So I've always known that I'm in the minority, and that is fine. I just really enjoy the challenge of fixing.
Find out the date so I can get down to that trigger that you just mentioned.
Yeah. I think somebody's accidentally come off mute. Oh, there we go.
Snagged it.
So I love the challenge of fixing somebody else's mess. I really enjoy the fact that they've already got a start in music. And I'll be completely honest with you and say that I always feel such an incredibly intimidating sense of responsibility taking beginners, because you have to be just so careful when you're taking beginners. And I find also that, it's wonderful to have beginners starting with you. They're with wonderful you, and they're not establishing any of those terrible bad habits that need to be fixed later on. But the really tricky part with beginners is, what if they're not being taken by somebody who's as experienced as you? What if they're being taught by the teenager down the road who's done 5th grade piano? And the problem is that what I find mortifying is often that teenager down the road who's decided that they want to earn a little bit of extra pocket money and they thought they might just start teaching piano. That teenager will often say, "Oh, it's okay, I'm only taking beginners," as if that's going to do the least damage. But ironically, they're the group that they should not be teaching. Like, no, if you've got really no idea what you're doing in terms of technique and setting things up properly, you should not be taking beginners. But then, of course, the good part about them doing that is then we get them as transfer students and we can fix those problems later on. Okay, so I thought we'd talk about the different types of transfer students. So what we really want to talk about is the fact that there are so many different types. All right, so here we go. There are transfer students that are unhappy with their previous teacher. That's probably the majority of transfer students that I get. Then you can have students who are happy with their previous teacher, but they're changing because of circumstance. The teacher has retired, or the teacher is having a baby, or the student has moved to a different area. There are lots of different circumstantial reasons why someone might change. Feel free to put, once I've gone through this list, feel free to put other reasons in the chat if you think of them. You could have a transfer student with a handover versus no handover. So it's much easier if you get a handover from the previous teacher and you get a heads up on what they're like, but very often there is no opportunity for that. So you are really trying to find out all about them the first time you meet them. There's also a transfer student where you have a parent-driven change. So the student might be perfectly happy with the teacher, but the parent wants to reduce the pressure or add the pressure. Might find the previous teacher just a bit too lax or something like that. Then there's when you're being taught by the parent. I regard this as a transfer student if they have been taught by their parent, because and it's often really challenging, a really, really challenging type of transfer student. Then there's the self-taught or internet-taught student, and they might have all sorts of expectations about what it's going to be like when they're learning from you. And then finally, there's the type of transfer student where they've got a fair bit of knowledge on another instrument, and they're a beginner on a piano, but they can integrate all their knowledge from that previous instrument. And I find this to be probably one of the most delightful types of transfer students, because they really have got a great head start without any of the bad habits. So I think that pretty much covers all the different types. And we are going to be talking mostly about the disasters. We're going to spend about 2 minutes maybe talking about the delights of transfer students, because let's face it, and then we're going to spend the rest of the webinar on the disasters, because let's face it, if they were all delights, we wouldn't have this webinar, would we? Okay, so the delights. Now, I'd like to define what I mean by a delightful transfer student. I mean that they come to you with a great technique and a great posture. All of their pieces are at an appropriate level for them. They have a broad range of skills and they own all their own music. This is a delight. You can simply continue from where they're up to, and it's just wonderful. The only slight downside of having a delightful student is that you might be a little bit intimidated by how well they've been taught previously, and you've got to live up to the expectations of that previous teacher and develop your own rapport and trust. So this can be a challenge, but just stick to doing what you well, or do what you know you do well. It's fantastic to concentrate on the areas in which they're strong to start with, and you just got to develop a rapport with this new student. But pretty much that's it for delights. I do find though that no matter how advanced or able the transfer student is, almost 100% of the time they have not done any improvisation and composition. And this is a fantastic thing to do with transfer students, because it is usually new ground for them, and it eases them up, and it's a wonderful area to explore. And I'm actually going to be talking about this tomorrow morning in the Piano Connect conference. If you want more information about that, we can pop it in the chat. It's pianoconnect.org. Sign up for that. It's going to be really good. Okay, so now let's move on to the disasters. And I thought we could have some fun by putting comments in the chat of all the different disasters we encounter when we get a transfer student who is not really up to scratch in whatever area. So let's have some fun. And Beth is going to find that mute button and tell us some of the things that come up. But I'd like to start off by just showing you a picture of a particularly disastrous event with a transfer student that I had. And I put this picture on Facebook about 3 years ago, and I captioned it "Transfer Student Hell," because this student came to me having written in every single note, letter name on the music. And I definitely discourage this because it doesn't help our reading at all. So what are some of the other things that you have encountered with transfer students? For example, they come to the lesson with an entire folder full of photocopies, not one shred of owned music. Or they have no idea how to sit at the piano. Their legs are dangling and their back is slouchy.
Catherine says the student could not read music at all. No understanding of rhythm from Ruth. Charlotte says the delight transfer student doesn't exist here.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Saying
Giselle.
That the student wrote the letter names in, but most of them were wrong. That's a double disaster. They might have absolutely no clue about what key their pieces are in, no knowledge of what a key even is. They may have not had any technique taught to them at all, no scales, nothing, and they might have been, thinking that they're going to do an exam, or they come and they're already enrolled for an exam that's coming up really soon and they haven't learned their pieces yet.
Oh no, the YouTube student. No. Oh yes.
The YouTube transfer, when they've been learning by synesthesia. Synesthesia is the one with the colored blocks all drop down.
Can't find middle C. Oh no.
Can't find middle C. Yes, that is very tricky. So we're all in this together. We all have had disastrous transfer students, and that's what this webinar is about, to try and get around these disasters. Okay, so we're going to, I think, start with one of our guest speakers, and that is Benjamin Steinhardt, because technique and posture are the really, really extremely important things to address. So I'll just tell you a little tiny bit about Ben. Benjamin Steinhardt enjoys an international reputation for his innovative teaching and regularly performs in the New York metro areas. His teaching incorporates concepts from Feldenkrais, Alexander Technique, Jenga Yoga, the Talbot approach, and music learning theory. So here is what Ben has to say about, and these are all pre-recorded interviews, so you're going to see a variety of wardrobe and hair, and but here is Ben. Hello, I am here with the absolutely spectacularly wonderful Benjamin Steinhardt, and he's going to tell us his best tips about what to do with transfer students in regards to fixing their technique. Hello, Ben.
Hey, Samantha, how are you?
I am so well. How are you?
Great, thank you. So I think the challenge with transfer students is that we need to find a balance between giving them the foundations they need that they may have been lacking with the previous teacher, but also not feel like they're going back to square one, feel like they're not making music. I find with all my transfer students, for the most part, unless they had a really good solid foundation, they tend to have some sort of bad habits with regards to hand posture, with regards to seating, with regards to movement at the piano. So I think everybody goes through the same sequence in their learning. And the important thing to recognize is there may be steps along that sequence that have been missing in previous training. And sometimes they're small steps and sometimes they're very large ones. But what you can do is think of what those steps would be and then apply them in sort of a meta way to the repertoire they're playing. So the first thing you always want to address is ergonomics at the piano, sitting at the piano. And this is something that I'm always shocked is ignored by a large percentage of the teaching population. So so I'm involved with a lot of the Facebook forums, and frequently, I'd say once a month, there's a question that pops up: "Help my student! Their fingers are popping up, or their wrist is down on the floor, or whatever it may be." And I would say 95% of the time, the student is probably sitting way too low or way too high. They're scrunched up next to the piano like it's a dinner table. Yes. They have no foot support. This is true for a lot of children. They really need something to put their feet on. So good hand posture starts with the feet. If you're really well supported in your feet, in your sit bones, if you're sitting well, your body's not going to compensate for all those imbalances in the body. So check that their bench height is good and that their forearm is essentially level with the top of the white keys. And you want to have them sitting nicely. So that's step one, because I don't think you can do anything else until you've addressed that. And then I think the second big thing that students may be missing is they might have an image of their hand, which is not a great image. So they usually, the two things that I run into is, one, they think they should hold their fingers curved to an extreme degree, because they've been told to hold a ball or something along those lines. And so they actually end up, over gripping. And so all you want them to do is just drop their hand by the side, and wiggle it out. And just bring it up exactly as it is, as it hangs by their side. With no detours, because a lot of times they'll do things like this, go onto the keyboard and stuff. And you'll notice if the hand is in its natural sort of shape here, there's a little space between the fingers. They're not stretched out, they're not squeezed apart. There's a nice little curve to these middle knuckles, a nice sort of ridge to the main knuckles, and it's sort of a little more straight on the tips here. And the forearm starts out in one piece. We might do wrist circles or something, but you want to start out from a neutral spot. And then I think the number one thing I do with transfer students is, regardless of where they are, if they need the work, is I do non-legato with them for a bit. And you can even have them take a pencil or something, and just to get the feeling of the forearm being responsible for dropping the finger into a key, whatever it may be. So they get the idea that it isn't just fingers pressing, but it is the hand connected to the wrist, connected to the forearm, which is responsible for this. So we always have support behind the playing finger.
Yes. Actually, just on that, what I say to my students when I'm doing with this, I say, now try to get this pencil to play, but you're not allowed to move your arm. And then they're trying to kind of squeeze it out with their fingers, and it's an unreliable sound. You can't actually get a proper sound. You miss it half the time. And that kind of proves the point that it's your forearm bringing your finger into that brings the sound.
I think that's a great image. And one of the problems I think a lot of transfer students have is they try to spread their fingers over, say, a 5-finger position or something along those lines. And because of this, the hand is already really stretched out. There's not, the fingers are isolated. It's very hard to even do like this. It's very hard to move your fingers. So if you can get them the idea that their hand is more of a paw or something, and we're just going to play one note at a time with a nice hand shape, and keep that basic hand shape as we do it. You solve 1,000 problems.
So if they are working on their Chopin waltz, what would that just be like it's obviously a long-term project to try and get the tension out of their hand or to fix their posture or whatever. So would you give them just like, ask them to do that dropping in on one note exercise for 30 seconds a day, or do you give them like a little technique correction exercise that they have to do?
Yes. I mean, I have one student now who was sort of learned on a keyboard and was learning on Zoom, and he's gotten a fairly advanced repertoire, but he has a gazillion poor technical habits. So we spend maybe 5-10 minutes of every lesson just working on very simple basics. And then the goal is to get them to apply that. What you want to have is even just 1 or 2 passages in their repertoire that they can use as a model for everything else. So they know what good playing feels like in their body. They know what it sounds like in terms of tone and sound, and then they can start applying that elsewhere. I think if you try to correct everything at once, it's overwhelming. And if you spend the whole time doing just one note, it's you take all the music away from them, and it's it ruins the whole reason we like to go into music. We like to play music.
Right, right. So if you, with this particular student who has a myriad of poor technical issues, what time frame would you say would be realistic before the good technique would start to get incorporated as a habit? Would it be a matter of weeks, months, years? How long before that student is fixed, in your opinion?
Well, like every student, it sort of depends on the student, how much work they put into it. But I'm finding with this particular student, for instance, he still has some bad habits when it comes to some of the things he worked on previously. But I've been sort of, with all the new repertoire I'm doing with him where he doesn't have these bad habits, he's been taking maybe 5 or 6 lessons, and he's already starting to develop some nice habits and some nice sound and some nice posture.
Right.
So it doesn't take that long to get kids playing in a good way.
Oh, sometimes. What's your best tip for getting them to embrace the importance of it? How do you convince your students of the importance of this? Is it because they can hear that they're playing better? Is it because they can notice the difference? Do you get them to notice how it feels when they're playing badly, like their old way, if you like, and then get them to notice how much better it feels? Or like what's your best tip for that, for getting them on board?
I think the goal is always to develop awareness in the student. So awareness of how they sound, awareness of how they feel. And with different students, it'll be different things. Maybe they want to play something fast and they can't do it. Maybe they want to, create a beautiful sound and they can't quite get it. They may be attached to something a previous teacher told them, and they may have a relationship with that previous teacher. So you have to find a way of getting to where you want to get to them without talking down about the other teacher. But if you can start developing even little bits of awareness, just through questions usually, how does this feel in your body? How does it feel if you do this? Like you were saying, if you just try to play with a finger alone versus if you do it with some arm support, what's the difference? How does it feel in your body? Do you like the sound better in one or the other? I think it starts building those connections in the brain and those, comparisons.
That is great. Okay, so it's probably a period of months at the maximum before a student of yours is has a technique that you're happy with, even if they come to you with
I'd say maybe 6 months or something along those lines. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's fantastic.
But unless they're injured or something, don't hold them back. I think that's a danger sometimes. Just only doing very dry technical things, and I know some teachers who like to work that way, but I find it sort of kills the spirit in a lot of students.
Right. Okay. So so we have to pick our battles, make sure they're still fulfilled musically, and just get them on board with understanding the importance of gradually fixing a few issues. So that's great. And any tips for getting parents on board for the slightly younger students? If the parents are constantly saying, "Oh, you got to have your fingers ready," I notice the parents sometimes want their children to have their fingers ready over the 5 notes, and parents use language like push the keys or press the keys. So do you have any tips for what to say to parents?
Well, the best thing is if the parent is in the lesson, so you can show them exactly what to do in those circumstances. I think in general, if you can get parents away from correcting their child to a place where they're more encouraging their child by saying things like, "Oh, I really loved how you played that. Could you play that again for me?" I think it immediately creates a better environment for practice at home.
Indeed, yes. Oh, that's all fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. I found that incredibly useful, and I love the way that Ben says, "Don't hold them back. Don't be dry. Don't feel that fixing technique means we have to do only very dry technical exercises. We still want our students to be loving music." So I will just add to that what I do when I have transfer students is that I deliberately move the stool to say a completely wrong position like this. I'll move it right out like that, and then I'll invite them to go to the piano, and I will see what they do. I want to see if they, like, if I have it all the way back here. Sometimes, I mean, the worst case scenario is they're not even going to try to fix it. They're just going to sit like this, or sometimes they will straighten it up, but they're not at all concerned with the distance from the keyboard. But mostly what happens is they do this. They pull it right in. And then they often I don't offer them a step. I just want to see what they do. I think it's really, really important to see what they do, because if the first thing that happens is we put them on the piano and get them sitting properly, well, then we haven't got a sense of what it is that they do at home all the time. And we can be almost 100% certain that they're usually not sitting correctly at home. That takes a lot of drilling from us. So I do like to have it as almost like a bit of a game. And if the parent is there and they want to help them get set up, that's fine too. But mostly they're usually sitting way too close, so their elbows behind them. Having feet supported, not sitting too close is really, really important. And another tip that I've come across that works really well is they have to be able to be in the process of standing up. Now, you can't see my feet, they're on the floor, but the idea is that you should be able to just stand up. You should be in a position to play that you could just stand up. So if your feet are dangling, there's no way, you can't stand up. And if you're sitting right back like this, you can't stand up. If I go to stand up now, I'm going to be coming forward. My feet are on the floor, and I'm just about to stand up. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much almost it. It's you're just about to stand up position. So that can really help explain to parents the importance, because your center of gravity wants to be, your balance needs to be over your feet, so that you've got freedom to play. And one more tip that I'll give you that I say to students, no matter whether they're beginners or transfer, I say, look, if they've ever learned to play the violin, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, because, like the first 6 lessons of violin lessons, you don't play anything. You just spend the whole time learning how to hold the thing, and learning how to hold the bow and learning the actions. So when you first learn how to play other instruments, you spend the first few lessons learning how to set that instrument up and learning how to hold it. And I say to my students, look, we're so lucky. We don't need to learn how to hold the piano. And they giggle. And I say, but we do have to learn how to hold ourselves. It's so important. We wouldn't be able to play the wrong way. So if you're sitting the wrong way, it's a bit like holding the saxophone backwards, or having your hands the wrong way on a recorder. You've got to actually have a certain way that you hold your body when you play piano for it to work properly. So okay, we're about to move on to Becki and special needs, but are there any burning questions about technique that anybody wants me to answer? I can see popping up, a couple of people have said thanks for the standing up tip. I have found that to be really useful, and you could also do it from going backwards, like start standing, then go to sit down, go to sit down, go to sit down, go to sit down, and stop there. You're not allowed to keep going like this.
Catherine also shared that she shows your video of 60-second splits on posture to all of her students.
Yes, it's a good use of 60 seconds. You can get that on blitzbooks.com. There's all the 60-second blitz videos, but also if you Google 60-second blitz posture, it does come up. So that's useful.
Awesome.
I forgot about that. So thank you.
And then Charlotte also offered that she jokes with the littles that they should not have T-Rex arms if they're too close, or zombie arms from too far away.
T-Rex arms, that's right, and zombie arms. That's fantastic. Yes, it should all feel very natural. And we don't want to be too squished or too far away. And the seat height is very important. So height and distance, it's all important, and it takes a while to get it set up. So take a photo of your students take a photo of them with them sitting wrongly, and take a photo of them sitting correctly, and get them to spot the difference. You sit incorrectly, get them to fix your posture. These are all really good ways of making sure that they're actually addressing it at home, and definitely get them to send you a photo of their setup at home. Okay, I think we're going to move on to Becki Laurent now. So Becki mostly talks about students with dyslexia. Here it comes.
My powers of fast forward and rewind are failing me. We'll just start here. What, Samantha? Okay, we'll start here at the end of Ben.
Correcting their child to a place where they're more encouraging their child by saying things like,
for students. Sorry, I didn't say who Becki was. Becki is a private music teacher, blogger, author, guest lecturer for local, state, and national conferences. She is located in Texas, where she's the owner and director of a music school with over 400 students. Her superpowers include ADHD, listening, analyzing, and getting things done. So here is Becki. Hello, Becki. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us about this important topic.
My pleasure. So excited.
Yay, so excited. So good to see you. Okay, so we're talking about transfer students specifically. So sometimes you get a transfer student and you have managed to find out a lot of information about them, and sometimes you may not have managed to find out a lot of information about them, and you know a lot about what happens when students have special needs, particularly visually, like dyslexia. So tell us what happens when you get a transfer student who is struggling, and in both of those scenarios.
Well, usually with a transfer student, I'm going to have them play for me first, just so I can see what they know. And then after they're done playing for me, I'm going to ask some very direct questions. I'm going to ask them, how did you learn this? Did your teacher play it for you and then you kind of picked it and put it together, listened to it over and over, and then you put it together? Did you read it off the page and then memorize it? Did you read it off the page and you're still reading it off the page? All of those questions kind of give me a sense of how they internalize information. Usually when I have a student who's got special needs, whether it's dyslexia or ADHD or a visual thing or whatever, I'm going to hear from them something to the effect of, well, it's really easier for me if my teacher plays it for me first, or if I hear it first and then I kind of memorize it. Ding, 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 this is going to be an indicator that I'm looking at a special needs kid, probably, whether they told me or not. That's how I'm going to approach my teaching. I'm also going to ask them to sight read a piece for me. When I put a piece of music in front of them to sight read, whether it's using Piano Maestro, which I use all the time for sight reading exercises, but also especially with transfer students, because the Piano Maestro sight reading, the Piano Maestro app has in it, embedded in it, tests, sight reading tests at different levels. So I can pick the test that I want them to take, so I can kind of see where they are based on what they played for me. My first indicator of whether or not they're good readers is going to be the look or lack thereof of panic on their face when I put new music in front of them. Because they're either going to go, or they're going to go, this is okay, I'm a terrible sight reader. And that's cool. Most people, even if they're good at notation, they're still probably going to not be great sight readers. But with special needs kids, it's really, really important to them that they are successful, and many times they are not successful in piano. So when they're transferring to another teacher, it's because the other teacher, either they didn't mesh together or the teacher wasn't really cognizant of the child's inability to not panic when they get a piece of music. People who have dyslexia in particular have a very defined list of reactions to new material. And so I'm always looking for those reactions. When I get a transfer student, I'm going to look for some of those reactions, whether they shut down, whether they completely freak out when I put a new piece of music in front of them. If they look at it and then they look at me and they like try to change the subject. This is I mean, these are not uncommon indicators of a person who's got dyslexia, because they have not had the time to process the information and they don't know how to react to that. So when I see those things, those are indicators to me that I need to tread very carefully. I've probably got a person who's got some kind of, reading issue of some sort, whether it's ADHD and they can't focus long enough to sight read, or it's dyslexia, which is a little bit deeper. Those are some of the things that I'm going to be looking for. I am going to ask them if their other teacher, that they're transferring from, had them do music theory in a book, or if they did music theory very practically, like off the page, and analyze their music while they were learning it. That's another really big indicator to me too of whether or what kind of, if there are any learning issues that I'm going to get from them. If they do have dyslexia or ADHD, they're going to look at me and say, yes, she tried to get me to do that book, but I don't even know where it is usually what I hear. I don't know where that is. So if they're losing their theory book on purpose, that's another indicator to me that maybe they just don't like writing the things down because they just don't process information that way. But those are some of the things that I'm looking for when I have a transfer student. Those are going to be some red flags for me that there might be a learning issue here that going on that I need to be aware of.
Okay. So if you put a single flashcard, just a single note in front of a student who has dyslexia, they'll have perhaps a stressed or emotional reaction to
Yes,
if they have dyslexia.
absolutely. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because you're probably not going to put a note in front of them that they are going to recognize. You're probably, I mean, even if you put one in front of them, the flight is so ingrained in them when they're presented with new information. Even if they know it, even if they took a minute to think about it and to breathe their way through this moment, they're still going to panic initially. Because it's new information, because they didn't have time to prepare themselves, because it's not in the context of other notes. It's just there, and they're put on the spot to identify it and play it. You as the teacher, when you do that to a student, you're very much putting them in panic mode because they don't have any of their survival techniques at hand. They can't compare that note to other notes in the phrase. They can't recognize it by sound usually. I mean, you get the deer in the headlights look like, I gotta go to the bathroom.
So if you're asking them to spot the difference between two notes, that's something different. That is
Yes.
giving something to compare, which is why, like I know you've used some rote repertoire stuff, and you're saying that works. That's helpful for dyslexic students because
It's definitely a better way for them to learn, especially your material in particular, which is why I love it for dyslexic kids. Once I teach them what it sounds like and I play it for them and they play through it, and then we look at the image of what it looks like, because dyslexic people are typically tend to be very visual people, which sounds kind of, oxymoronic, because you typically think of a dyslexic person and they see things differently. They don't really see things differently. They don't hear as well as we need them to hear. That's part of their dyslexia. It's a decoding language learning deficit. It's not that they can't see music the same way you and I see it. They see it just fine. They just don't, they're not able to make it sound like anything. So yes, if I can play it for them and then show them what it looks like, and then show them another piece of music that has a slight difference to it, part of dyslexia training for them, usually with regards to literacy, is teaching them to look for those differences between SH and CH, TH. They have to recognize that those letters are different and that they sound different. And so when you do that with rote material, particularly your rote material where there's just slight differences, it's an indicator, it's something that they can really focus on, and know that there's going to be a change at this point.
that is so encouraging. That's really good to know. It's really good to know. I've never had dyslexia myself. I haven't taught many dyslexic students, but just knowing that this is accessible to all students, especially dyslexic students. It's good to know. Now, I did ask you to be brief, and so I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I have a question for you. And
Sure.
that is, do you remember a time in your teaching way back before you knew very much about all this, where you had a student and you wish you'd done something differently? Like you realize now that that student needed a different approach. And do you remember a time where you've done that at all in your
I
teaching?
mean, I could give you a list of students that I wish that I had done things differently with. Yes, a very long list of things that I wish that I had known even 3 years ago. I wish that I had known some of this information. It would have changed. It would have changed the course of how I taught those children, and it would have been less painful for both me and the student. Um, Mostly, the thing that I would change the most is to go back and spend more time teaching them rhythm and really building those rhythmic skills. And I say rhythm in particular, not just notation, but especially just rhythm. Um, because there's fewer things for them to manipulate in rhythm. With melodies, you have to go up and down, you have to combine rhythm with going up and down the staff. But with rhythm just all by itself, you're really teaching the foundation language of music. And until they're really, really solid with rhythm, and really have built those neural pathways in their brain rhythmically, you can't ask them to go up and down. They're not going to see it yet. And so I feel like if I'd known that, going back, it would have been easy for all of us. I mean, just it would have been easier for everybody.
That is so helpful. Thank you. And because we often get phone calls from, as teachers from, like I know I got one the other day from a mother who has a child who's turning 4 in March. And she says, oh, my daughter can already knows all her letters and all her fingers. And I'm thinking, and I've just realized, I bet that child has no rhythm yet, has not been asked to just play along or clap a beat. There's no point in knowing all your letters and all your fingers. That's not what music is.
Well, no, and more than that, because now it's one of the questions that I ask when I get a very small child into my studio is I will ask them, um, can your child rhyme words with you? And that is an indicator to me, whether the parents know it or not. If your child is 4 years old and they can't rhyme words, um, that's a huge, huge flag that this child either is has dyslexia or is going to have a problem learning language. And then, I will ask the parent, well, if you clap your hands, can they repeat that same thing to you? Um, Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. Some of that is, the younger they are, the more difficult that is. But by age 4 and 5, if you clap a rhythm, they should be able to mimic that exactly what they heard. If I don't hear that from the child, I know there's a lot of work to be done in the ear.
That is also incredibly helpful. Thank you, Becki. This is
You're so welcome.
I've learned so much. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.
Wow. Well, that was just incredibly eye-opening for me to realize that I can focus on the emotional reaction of my transfer students to whatever it is that I'm trying to do, and it gives me a huge insight as to how they feel about it and what they're capable of doing. And this is just so important for us to be able to try and figure out where they're at when transfer students come to us. Now, I did get a lot of questions about different special needs, but they were very, very specific. Like, how do I teach a blind person? Or what's the best way to teach a person that has cerebral palsy? Or adults with dementia. But I felt these were so specific, and not all of us would be having a lot of experience with these types of transfer students. So I thought I would tell you about 2 other types of special needs that I've come across a lot, but mostly because they are the special needs of my own 2 children. So firstly, with my son, he has autism and ADHD. And from a very young age, I learned with him, my young age and his young age, is that it was very important in lessons to be absolutely direct and to never use sarcasm, because autistic kids don't get sarcasm, and to give one instruction at a time. So there is no point in saying, okay, go and sit on the stool and take out your book and turn to page 38 and do question 1. It will just be a blur. You have to first say, okay, let's get on the stool. Let's sit properly. Now take out your book. Now wait until that's done. And so on and so on. So, what I felt is very important is to have an agenda for the lesson. So it can be incredibly calming for autistic children to know what's coming up in the lesson. They do not like spontaneity. They do not like surprises. So if they know you're going to spend 5 minutes on this and then 5 minutes on this and 5 minutes on this, and say, now the plan might change a little bit, but this is what we're going to try to do, that's very good. Always give warnings and ask for permission. Is it okay if we talk about this for a while? Is it okay if we switch to XYZ? And particularly for touch, I mean, we need to be asking all students, is it okay to touch them? But particularly for anyone who has autism, it's very important to get that permission and to prepare them, and perhaps try to work as much as you can without touch. And the whole ADHD thing is just making sure that that's just that one instruction at a time, not loading them up too much, and switching activities fairly frequently. So that's my experience with autism and ADHD. And then with my daughter, her special need is debilitating perfectionism to the point of depression and anxiety. And I mean that quite seriously. And I feel that this is becoming more and more of a problem, especially with teenage transfer students that I get. That it's just society, it's just what's happening. And so I found that what really works for her is to get her to understand, okay, now you're probably going to make at least 5 errors. It doesn't matter. That would be the average. That would be the norm. I'd like you to keep going no matter what, because often students who are perfectionistic will not, they just get so upset if they make a mistake. They're mortified, or perhaps they won't even try something new because they're so worried about failing. And then they're seen as a little bit defiant or lazy, but they're not. They're just too scared to fail. So I really believe that this is a special need. And I'm going to tell you one thing that seemed to work wonders with my daughter. I was actually sitting in on one of her flute lessons, and it was her flute teacher that did this, because she was a very advanced flautist. But she would often burst into tears if she got criticized, that sort of thing. It was a bit unmanageable. So this particular flute teacher said to her, now look, today, because last week we'd had a crying episode, today I'd really like to talk to you like one of my university students, okay? So I'm not going to concentrate on the things you're doing well, because that's not a great use of our time. I really want to be able to get into the nitty gritty of things to you and talk to you like you're a lot older, really advanced. And her whole demeanor changed. It was like, okay, I can take this. You want to treat me like a grown-up? I can do this. And I have used that to great success with so many of my students. I've just prepared them for it and said, okay, now I really want to talk to you today like I want to, as if you're super advanced, okay? I'm going to talk about, I'm going to list all the things that could be better. Is that okay with you? And they're up for the challenge. So I suggest that as a possible way of handling students who are very anxious about their general performance. I do recommend 2 fantastic books. Mindset by Carol Dweck. I'm sure many of you have read that. And also Drive by Dan Pink. So that's Mindset by Carol Dweck and Drive by Dan Pink. These are wonderful books for understanding mindset and motivational processes. So now, if there aren't too many burning questions, I think we're going to need to move straight on to how to handle adult transfers. So while Beth gets this video ready, I will tell you about Dr. Deborah Rambo Sinn. She is a friend and colleague of mine, so a froligue, as I like to refer to her, and the same with Becki and Ben also. So Deborah's diverse career has taken her around the world. She teaches piano classes, ear training, and entrepreneurial courses at Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. She has presented hundreds of talks and workshops to music teacher organizations, including national and state conferences, and she works with independent music teachers around the country each week. She is the author of 2 fabulous books on piano technique and proficiency, and Beth is going to put links to those 2 books in the comments. So here is Deborah. So, Deborah, thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me about transfer students. And the first thing I would like to know is, what's it like when you have 100% of your transfer students who are adults?
Well, it's an interesting question because right now I don't teach children, but my transfer students are coming to me pretty much 3 categories. One would be college students who are not majoring in piano but are playing at a high level. I teach also a lot of other teachers online, so there are transfer students of a different magnitude. And then I have students that are coming back to the piano after they've retired. So those are basically my 3 pockets. And even when I was teaching kids and I have basic raw beginners, I kind of consider everybody a transfer student in a way, because everybody comes with their own set of issues, of their history, of how they take instruction. So all of that's kind of has to get negotiated, when you start lessons. So I'll talk a little bit about my students that come in as college students and study with me privately. I like to do an assessment, and that involves more than them telling me, well, I did level 3 or whatever they did, because I actually got caught up in that this semester where I ended up giving a student some repertoire that was too hard because I trusted his word on something because he didn't want to play for me. And so we've had to kind of wind back, and I apologized and that. So I love for students to come in and play something for me because that will tell me kind of what music they like. It tells me what their technique is like. It tells me how fearful they are to play for somebody else. I think that's a really important thing. It also tells me what level they probably are. And then I will give them a little bit of sight reading to do, something that's not too terribly difficult, something that's much easier than what they played for me, just to get an idea of their reading abilities. So those are kind of the things that we do. And then that's the information they give me, and the information I give them is that my studio is a safe place and that I'm not there to make fun of them or to, shame them in any way, and that I'm always looking for their next step and try to be encouraging in doing so, and encourage them always to ask a lot of questions. And I check in with them every now and then and say, well, how's it going? And that sort of thing. So the things I would only teach normally 12 1/2-hour lessons, which is kind of nuts, but that's my first kind of grouping of classes with them. So we do a lot of different things. We might do some duet playing. We might do just some skills sorts of things if they have some gaps there. So
Getting
anyway.
back to what you said about getting them to play something for you. So you want to know what level they play at. And you also, but you said you want to know how they feel about playing in front of you. Tell us more about that, what it's like to have this category of students who carry with them probably more emotional baggage than younger students would.
Oh, well, it's interesting because kids come to us and they don't expect to know how to play the piano, right? And adults show up on our doorstep and they come with a lot of shoulds. I should be able to do this, and I should be able to do this easily. And so I always try and tell them what to expect. I say, well, this is probably the next step that you need to take. It's a little tricky, so let's walk through it. So I try and always make sure that no matter where the student is, that they leave the studio with the tools they need to be successful in whatever we're trying to do at the moment. So
that sounds very encouraging and excellent. And what do you do when students come with an inflated sense of what they have achieved or what they can do on the piano? So for example, that when you believed that student that they were at a certain level and it turned out that they weren't, was that a bit of a blow for that student?
no, I think he was relieved, this particular one. And he says, yeah, I thought that I knew all this stuff, but I really need to review a lot more than I thought I would need to. And that was true. So, and learn a lot of new things. So if a student is, I kind of let them roll with it. In some instances, I have one woman who's 78 and she takes online lessons with me. And I figure, if you're 78, you can play whatever you like. Now, everything she likes is above her pay grade or above her level, but what the heck? That's what she wants to play, and that's what brings her joy. So there's a bit of balancing it out. She's not doing it for a grade. For those doing it for a grade and have performances and things like that, we really have to have pretty honest discussions about what they're able to do, and just encouraging them towards success rather than striving for failure sort of thing. So
Right. So if you have students who are older and are not working towards any kind of assessment and they're just playing for the joy and they want to play pieces that are too hard for them, which I'm sure many, like I know I have encountered students like that, and many people who are watching this today would feel like that. What would be your top tips for guiding students through repertoire that is too hard for them?
I do two things. One is that I might give them a section of the piece that they want to do, and encourage them not to do the whole thing. And then I might say something like, well, I'm a new teacher, and for us to get to know each other and understand the language that I use in teaching, and understand what things resonate with you, let's try something a little bit not so difficult so that we can communicate that without a lot of difficulties getting in the way. And then maybe we can move on to more difficult repertoire. So
that's brilliant. That's a brilliant spin to put on it to get them to attempt something that they perceive as easy or too easy for them, but they might actually have a lovely successful experience doing that. And then have you found that sometimes they might embrace that easier repertoire as a result?
not too often. They still want to try the harder things, but like I said, if they're not doing it for or if just doing it for fun, and not as a career avocation, then that's okay with me. I'll take them where they're at, and we'll move to the next logical step within that difficult repertoire. So there might be some nuggets in there where I can really teach them about layering textures, that maybe we only do in a few measures in that particular piece, but maybe that kind of starts to become part of their musical language. So one can only hope for the best, right?
Absolutely. And I do have one more thing I wanted to ask you about. What do you do when an adult transfer student comes to you and their technique really is very, very bad? Which would be a result of either many years of ingrained bad habits or just that they're new to the instrument. What can you do with people who where there's a huge overhaul?
Well, I'm pretty honest with them, and I may mention that, and because I want them to play for a long time, I don't want them to get injured. So I think bad technique can lead to injuries, especially with older folks. And we have to be careful about all these, injuries that happen in the thumbs and the arthritis and things like that. So, and some of it's an individual case. So you look at their hands and you say, well, they're probably going to be able to take on this much. So I have two basic technical things that I do with older folks, and I'm pretty strict on those. And other than that, if they want to take things further, that would be fine with me too. And I'll say, there is a way you could do that easier. Would you like to know what that is? So you kind of draw them into the process that way. But the two things I talk about a lot are simply being able to use the wrist to drop weight into the keys, right? So if we're doing chords, right, that there's a flexibility happening there, and using some weight instead of brute force. And then just the supination pronation of the forearm rotation. So I find that the third thing, the thumb, getting the thumb to unlock when it's not being used, is very difficult with adults. So I can usually get it loosened up a little bit, but that's just a long ingrained habit. But the first two, I'm very serious about making sure that the students are doing that every lesson.
That sounds so good. And also your point about encouraging them to understand how important it is, A, not to get injured, and B, that it actually will be easier for them to play if they can get these things right. So it's designed to make their lives easier, not harder. Yes.
Yeah, that's the point.
Well, thanks so much, Deborah, for these wonderful, wonderful insights.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me, Samantha.
So I thought that was great, and I loved it that Deborah touched on the art of spin. Now, with any of our transfer students, I really think that the art of spin is very important. I tend not to use the words easier or harder when we're talking about. I would never say, oh, we need to go to an easier piece. I would just say, we need to go to a piece that concentrates more on this aspect of your technique, or we need to have things that only have let's go to a piece that has 2 main components, instead of 15 components. So when they're attempting things, a piece that is too hard for them, we can say this piece really does contain many technical issues, and that's a lot to be concentrating on all at one time. How about we concentrate on this piece, which has just one of those technical issues to start? So it's a great to use language in order to that makes them feel like they're staying at the same level. They're just specializing. We just want to specialize for a while. That's it from our 3 main speakers. And what I was thinking now is we'd go on to some of the questions that have been emailed in. And firstly, I'd like to ask Tara, who is here on the call with us, to come off mute and ask her question, which is very wonderful that she emailed into us. So take it away, Tara.
Thank you very much, Samantha. I think the first few questions have already been answered for me in terms of transfer students, and particularly adults who come where their expectations are a lot higher, or their own sort of, I guess, expectations of themselves and their own perception of where they're at is a lot higher than where they are actually at, particularly technique versus their reading. But I guess my questions then are more about repertoire, suitable repertoire for these students. So what would be some suitable repertoire that you could give to students who come where their technique might be, quite good, but their reading is not so good, without going right back to the basics, giving them stuff that really is probably a little bit babyish.
Okay. I did have a bit of a think about this. So for the teenagers, I love Audi's work. And they love it too because it's very accessible, very appealing, and it's really quite repetitive. They're often 4-chord songs, and once you've worked out the first 4 bars of the piece, which can take a little bit of decoding if they're not great readers, then the rest of the piece is kind of like a variation of that. So I would suggest Audi. I do like the Hal Leonard publications of adult popular piano for older kids, and then I do like Piano Safari Book 3 because when you don't want to take them back to the beginning, but you just want some pieces that are for reading and some pieces that are for rote. So I would suggest those 3 things, and then I'm going to be a bit narcissistic and recommend my own material because I really feel that the rote repertoire series is specifically designed to be able to play pieces that sound good, but it takes all the stress out of reading, but it's still teaching them about reading. So we can play something, we don't feel like we're going backwards, we're not playing anything boring, but we're still learning how to associate the score with the sound and making those correlations with reading. And then apart from that, flashcards, just having using some rote teaching in pieces and thinking of sight reading as it's a separate skill that needs to be developed separately. None of us really sight read proficiently at the level we can play. We would all have to sit down and learn a piece. The level that we can sight read fluently is usually quite a lot lower than the standard we could play as in a concert or in a recital. So it is okay if students can't sight read the pieces that they're going to play. That's okay. It's not really expected. We want to work it up from a very low level. So for me, my go-to resources are my own rote repertoire material, and the Piano Safari flashcards and Untitled for the teenagers. Does that help?
Great, thank you. Yeah, I love Untitled.
Okay.
I teach a lot of his pieces to students. Yeah, thank you.
Really good. You did also ask what would be a good starting point for classically trained students that wish to go on to contemporary or jazz.
Yes.
And my two main things for that are Susan Dee's, her book called How to Read a Chord Chart for classically trained pianists. It's amazing.
Awesome.
Just look up Susan Dee's chord chart, and that's DEAS. And also Jeremy Siskin's Jazz Piano Fundamentals is fantastic. So I would recommend those too.
Jeremy Siskin, was it?
Jeremy Siskind, yes, Siskind.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure. So thank you, Tara. And now, if Charlotte is still on the call, Charlotte Stone, I was hoping that you could ask your question live. It's a real doozy. Charlotte, are you there? Come off mute if you are.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Now,
yes. Awesome.
Find you and spotlight you, hopefully. Okay. Go. There we go.
I'm just trying to find my question at the moment too. Yeah. So, like, yeah, my struggle with transfers is often just actually managing their motivation and trying not to have them feel discouraged while we're filling in gaps. So mostly, like, I need useful strategies for assessing them in the first place and working out what their gaps are without them feeling like they're being tested. And then like how long should that assessment process take, I guess, because a lot of the time you look at them in the first lesson and you get them to do a bunch of stuff, play a bunch of stuff for you, and you get some idea, but then a lot of their gaps, you don't really see the extent of it until you've been teaching them for a while. So yeah, sort of how long is that process always ongoing, or yeah.
We all hear you, don't we? Like, if we could collectively come off mute now, which we're not going to do, but we would all say, yes, we all have the same problem. So how to assess good strategies for assessing a transfer student. I mean, you definitely want them to play for you and to have their music up, and then asking them to play certain sections of their pieces again. So, can you just go from here? Can you just go from there? And you'll quickly get a sense of whether or not they feel comfortable, if they can read it, or if they're just completely confused and they've been taught by rote. Also, as Becki said in her video, watching out for the emotional reaction when you're trying to assess gaps. So if you're giving them something to sight read and they look horrified, maybe move on and do sort of imitation playing. So I think that finding out what they do well is very important. Asking them to sing back, clap back, play along, improvise something, play a duet with you. Finding out what they do well quickly, and then concentrate on that a lot while you're trying to fill the gaps. But I think as teachers, the main thing is that we have to talk to the parents and set up the expectation that it's going to take you a few weeks to really work it out. And what I say to the parent is, look, it may seem like we're not progressing just for the first few weeks. It may seem like that, but I can assure you that that's not the case. And I want them to be mucking around on the piano. I'm going to get them to compose. I'm going to get them to make things up or change the endings of some of the pieces they've got. Get them to work with what they've got and change things and work on some improvisation and composition while you're trying to get a sense of what they do. I don't think there is a parent that wouldn't appreciate that you would like to take some time to get to know their child. It cannot be always a really fantastic smooth changeover, and sometimes the reason we run into problems, as you said, Charlotte, like the gaps turn up later on, is because you haven't really had a chance to assess these things, because pressure's on from the parent, especially if they're already enrolled in an exam or something like that. So give yourself some breathing time by actually saying to the student and parent, look, it's going to take us a couple of weeks, maybe 3 or 4, to get to know each other. Don't worry if you don't feel like you're progressing straight away. It is, if you take the pressure off, it can be a little bit easier, and just zoom in on what their strengths are to start with. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we did have, thank you so much for sending that in, Charlotte. And now we do have another couple of questions that were sent in, but people who couldn't be live with us on the call. So another Charlotte King, asked, how do we give the impression of continuing to move forward while we actually have to go backwards? Like if they, and I can see these things coming up in the chat, you know, they're already doing grade 7 pieces, but they really shouldn't be because they can't do this, that, and the other. So it's such a big issue, and we have to convince them of the validity of just trying to pare back and work on certain things. Repertoire rich learning is the way to do it. So giving them lots and lots of pieces that we'll call them specialized pieces or rocket pieces, or give them a name which doesn't, just something other than easy, and address those smaller skills. Now, certainly with parents in Australia, I use the NAPLAN analogy. So I say to parents, you know, would you be happy if your child at school was only doing NAPLAN exercises the entire year to prepare for that exam, if that's all they did at school and nothing else? And the parent would say, no, that wouldn't be good. And then that's my opportunity to say, well, that's what would happen if we were only doing 3 pieces a whole year to prepare for an exam. That is like only doing NAPLAN tasks and nothing else. We're missing out on all the broader skills of music. So we have to get parents on board, and to a certain extent, we have to get students on board. So if you're in Australia, the NAPLAN analogy works well. And I also, the 40-piece challenge or any number of piece challenge works wonders to get students with repertoire-rich learning so that they can build up their skills with a wide range of repertoire. Then another question that was sent in by Liz Gethings was, what happens if you have a transfer student that has been taught to read by mnemonics? Every good boy deserves fruit, green buses drive fast always, face, blah, blah, blah. And she says, would you try to undo that, or would you try merging the approach with an intervallic approach? And my answer to that is definitely forget the mnemonics, don't use it anymore, and just go straight to the intervallic approach. And a really great way to get students to understand that the mnemonics are slowing them down is just get them to read the word cat on a page. You say, can you read this word? And they'll say cat. And then you say, okay, but how come you didn't say C-A-T, cat? And they'll say, because you don't need to spell it first, you can just say the word. And I said, that's right. So with notes, you don't have to know the name of the note, you can just play it. You can eliminate that process. You know, the names, it doesn't really matter what we call it, but we want to go straight from symbol to sound. We don't want to be mucking around in between trying to name that note. So mnemonics slows down the process of sight reading. That is a whole other webinar, which we could do another time. And then another burning question that I just saw come up in the chat from Kathy Davis is that what do you do when the parents dictate the level that they want? So they're saying, I definitely want my child to do this exam or that exam. Kathy, is that exactly what you meant? If you would like to come off mute and let us know what happens when you are bowing to the pressure of feeling like you have to bow to the pressure of the parent.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's a very real and prevalent situation. And I try to speak to them and encourage them to see that we need to have a more holistic approach. But my issue is that it puts a tremendous amount of stress and pressure on me, because the customer is actually asking for something that's just a little bit different to what I'm suggesting. So I don't have the answers, because I had someone with a D in grade 7 come to me with literally no legato. They couldn't do walking fingers, which is like, you know, lesson 1 when you get to technique after posture. So that's pretty sad that someone had taught to that level, and I just couldn't handle it. Yeah. So that's why I'm asking for people's wisdom on this.
Yes, I think you're right. It's whether or not you, like, sometimes the pressure is to And sometimes maybe it's okay if you feel that pressured. It's okay to say, look, I don't think I'm the right teacher for you, because I will want to go back and work on this, that, and the other before we can move forward. And perhaps you need to find someone who's willing to work from exactly where you're at. I think at that point in time, they've already transferred from one teacher for whatever reason. I think there's a reason why they got a D. They want you to work miracles. As teachers, we can't work miracles. The lessons give them knowledge. The practice gives them skill. And they have to be prepared to take on board the knowledge that we give them. It's very important to have the parent and the student be quite deferential to the fact that we're the experts. That's the reason why they're coming to us, because we're supposedly the expert in this field of playing piano and teaching piano, and we're trying to help them as much as we can. And if they have very, very set expectations on what should happen and the process and the way it should happen, that can be sometimes too hard. I think it's okay as teachers for us to have a niche, for us to specialize, and for us to say, look, maybe we're not the right fit. And you will know this in a trial lesson. I always run trial lessons. I have a very specific onboarding process, which I was going to go through today, but we're going to totally run out of time. So I'm going to have another webinar, I think, called Student Onboarding. Give me a thumbs up if you think that would be a good how to make sure that the students, that once you accept them into your studio, that you're really, really happy that you've done that. So thank you, Kathy. That was an awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, great to know that we do actually have a choice. And
yes,
so
we absolutely
have our students. Thank you.
So there are so many other questions that we are not going to get to today. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm definitely going to make a note about a student onboarding webinar, but next Friday, if you want to send in some more questions, next Friday I'm going to do a Facebook Live and answer some more questions about transfer students. I'm going to do it pretty much almost exactly a week from today, so it will be midday next Friday, which will be 8 p.m. Eastern time. It'll be a horrible 1 a.m. UK time. Sorry about that, but it will be there. It'll be up there to watch at a later point. So if you had, I saw so many interesting things come up in the chat, and I hope that, and it's like a little community was going on in the chat, and everybody was making suggestions to each other, and that was it's just fantastic because we need each other. Okay, so I think I'm very conscious of the time, so our webinar is coming to a close. So I just want to wrap up by finishing off that story about Simone, my transfer student who I did the wrong thing with, and I took her right back to the beginning, just playing boringly, because that's all she could read. Well, that's not a piece. That's terrible. I should not have done that. If I had had my repertoire material at that time, that's what I would have used, and it would have been great for her. She would have been so much happier, and so would I. So the reason why I use it, I wrote it because I wanted to help students like that. Became very inspired by rote teaching and the benefits of rote teaching, but we don't have to have rote pieces and then separately reading pieces. We can have rote and reading pieces. So that's what the series is all about. And there's a very special coming up next month. Just I encourage you to go to roterepertoire.com, and at least, if you haven't done so already, at least try out the free packs that are on there. Try them with your students, and you'll see that it works for all transfer students. It works for any age or ability, and it gets them playing pieces that sound good without the pressure of score reading straight away, but they do end up reading and they do end up creating. So please do that, because the special that's coming next month is only for people who have registered on the site. So go and sign up for that. Basically that is a wrap for our webinar today. I hope you have gotten some really, really useful tips from it. We'll have a replay link ready over the weekend. Give us a couple of days. In the next webinar, we'll do it all about student onboarding, and I will show you the questionnaire that I've developed to send out to parents and students, which works really well. In the meantime, I hope that you have a wonderful end to your January break. If you're in Australia, good luck with the start of the term. And otherwise, I just hope you have a sensational weekend. Thank you so much for coming, and see you next time.